At the start of my career, I hated my job and I had all these goals and my goals were very short term. Think bigger and think longer term.
When you do have customers, loving what you're doing as a brand, it's like a regular check-in. It's like an account management meeting with them, right?
There's tons of case studies that creating podcasts, creating YouTube channels, creating newsletters, posting stuff on social works to build B2B companies.
But ask feedback within the team is do you want to listen to it? People want to watch it. We don't want to watch it. If we don't want to watch it, why is everyone else going to want to watch it? Or you do a blog article, you do anything.
Chris Walker and what he did with his content strategy, his podcast, and his LinkedIn over the last 3 years, and how he used that to grow Refine Labs and now Paceto is one of the best case studies in the world for it.
Hey there, and welcome to this week's episode of Pulse. I'm Julian Wallis, and today we're joined by Erik Jacobson, the CEO of Hatch, and we're going to get into all details around content marketing, B2B marketing, and all things podcasting. Erik has a lot of experience in that area, and we're excited to have you on, Erik. Thanks for joining.
Julian, thanks for having me, man. Looking forward to it.
Same here. So give us a bit of background about yourself, Erik, and those that are listening, let us know a bit about yourself.
Yeah, totally. So, I've been in the content podcast game for almost 10 years now. Honestly, back in 2014, I quit my job. I pitched my way into some work with Tim Ferriss and Jason Calacanis and some big podcasters back then. I parlayed that into creating a podcast PR agency called Lemon Pie. I ran that for about 6 years. Got that to 7 figures, and just started seeing more of the content production problems for companies exist. We had a lot of people coming to us saying should I start my own podcast? Should I start creating my own content? And I realized actually the bigger and better opportunity for me to pursue would be what we've now created with Hatch, and I've been running for the last 3.5 years, where we help companies create an efficient content engine through video shows, video series, podcasts, short form video content, really, content produced for social media and content platforms where buyers hang out and consume content today. But where our focus is with video at the center.
Yeah, no, awesome. And it's brilliant. I've been following your stuff for a while as well, but help us understand a bit more, I suppose, from your side. What were some of the bigger challenges that you faced early on in the days of Hatch? It obviously came from somewhere, and you've had experience with it, as you said, with quite a few big names in the podcasting scene, or something you're passionate about. But what are some of the things that some of the challenges you came up against in the early days, especially trying to, I suppose, get content from other shows and help produce that? Was there anything specifically that you found challenging there?
Yeah, I mean, there was challenges on kind of two ways to look at it. Challenges for us and kind of riding the market momentum of this strategy. This strategy is now much more talked about. Creating media, creating content, building an audience, stuff like that. It was not nearly as popular or well known, back when I was doing this 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago. So we were early, but not too early. And that's actually what I've realized is the sweet spot. But then the other problem is the problem we were solving. And that problem was, companies had difficulty getting these things off the ground and running them efficiently. And so what we realize is if they're not able to run it efficiently, they won't run it long enough for it to work. And either they're overspending, the cost is not sustainable. They have too many people involved in the process. It's content by committee, which, as we all know, that just kind of waters down. If you do anything by committee, whether creative, especially content, design, or even just marketing strategies in general, usually you get a average or below average result. So we saw a lot of that. And then we saw the experts in the companies who would be the forward faces of the content brands. they were having to spend too much time on it themselves, and they were already super busy actually like doing other things in the company. And so all those things just like, were really the problem areas that we wanted to focus on helping. And of course,
Yep.
to, have an output that's higher quality than, non-video, non-creatives would be able to create on their own, but also make the process more efficient so it's sustainable and that it actually works.
Yeah. No, definitely. How'd you meet Chris? Obviously Chris Walker is who I'm talking about. Obviously that's how we got introduced there, and haven't seen. I've watched a fair bit of your stuff, but I haven't seen too much talked about on that. How did he become involved in Hatch?
Yeah, I've kind of had a history of doing this ever since I started on my entrepreneurial journey, um, where I will provide value to somebody I want to work with first, and oftentimes for a very long period of time, and actually like an overwhelming amount of value is what I try to do.
Yep.
And I did that with Tim Ferriss. I did that with Jason Calacanis when I first started. I did the same thing with Chris. I did the same thing with Dave Gerhardt. And so, yeah, a few years
Yep.
ago, I saw that Chris was executing on his podcast. This was actually fairly early in that journey for him. He's obviously one of the top B2B marketing content creators in the world at this point, and I could tell early on that that was going to be the case because of how good his content was. And so I offered to help him produce it for free. Um,
Yeah. Okay.
and the way that I actually even had an into that conversation was because I invited him to be a guest on my podcast,
Okay.
and I had a little bit of rapport there because of that. And then I didn't pitch him on my services. I just offered to help him for free. And we did that for a long time and parlayed that and built our relationship from there.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, definitely. It's always something across my own journey as well. Like how I've found it opens doors, right? People think it's a somewhat of a, I suppose, what's the way to put it? The wrong way to go about it, but it's actually the right way to go about it. Like people don't necessarily want to give before they want to take something, right? And they're like, oh no, if I do it for free, I'm not going to be able to, people just try and take advantage of me, etc., or whatever else. But really, the facts are the right people that you're trying to get, the right people you're trying to connect with will actually appreciate what you're doing, and they'll see the value in what you're providing, and it will open doors. I just know that through my own experience, through some of the things and strategies we've done, that obviously not in the exact same space, right? But the same idea where you're doing something for free, not just that's low value or easy to do, right? Because that's just, it's easy to do and everyone could do that. If it's easy to do, the barrier to entry is pretty low. So yeah, definitely agree with that. It's very interesting to hear that from your perspective. How do you see Hatch specifically evolving in the next 5 years as a company? I want to get into a bit more around AI and content and that a bit later as well. But, with Hatch, how do you see that evolving specifically with the company as well?
Yeah. So, how we're thinking about Hatch, at least today, and what our vision is for the future is um, where we are right now in this moment of time with companies adopting content creation as a go-to-market strategy, and how early that still is. Like we're still getting off the last decade of the predictable revenue model of essentially like finding all your prospects and cold emailing them and kind of capturing the demand via lead gen ads, paid search, things like that. And so
Yeah.
what we want to do now is marry the trend of that, which we've believed in for a long time, which is you need people who aren't looking to buy something right now, but could buy from you in the future to like you and trust you and get value from you right now so that when they are ready to buy in the future, you're on that short list. And
Yeah.
usually the vendors that are selected when they are in market to buy are those that were on the short list day one because they were top of mind, not because they went to a search engine and found somebody they never heard of and went through their buying cycle. And so 95% of the buyers today who could be your buyers in the future are not actively searching. So we want to help companies power that strategy, while at the same time, video is a mega trend. Like video is every social platform and content platform is essentially making or going to make video the center of their platform for the most part. And so we want to be one of the best in the world at combining those two things and helping companies create content with video at the center and in a way that is meant to be educational based sales, and not direct response based sales. So whether that's through, continuing through video shows, video series, YouTube channels, short form video series, like you just, short form 2, 3, 4 minute series, quote unquote, that just live on organic social platforms, not necessarily like a long form show. So essentially short form and long form video content is that's meant to build an audience and build trust is where we're headed.
Yeah, awesome. I want to get into a bit around the inefficiencies you mentioned. Obviously, we've got our own content program up and running now, and some of the things that you described regarding time that it takes or any of that kind of thing. It's all it's very much familiar with us, but it's something that we're very much prioritizing. And the reason I love doing it is I just love having conversations with people like yourself, right? It's a more of a interesting chat, and get to meet new people, etc., and just discuss cool ideas and different methodologies and things. So it's really great. But there is probably what a lot of people don't see is there's a lot of work that goes in behind the scenes to actually organize everything around guests and scheduling and planning, research, you're just all different things, right? And you'd know this far more than me, but I'd like to get your thoughts on what are some of the top inefficiencies and some of the top challenges, I suppose, you see with these content programs when they're rolled out, whether it's long form or short form. We don't have to get that specific if you don't want to, but more just around, I suppose, where can people focus? How can people, really put some systems and structures in place to try and overcome some of those hurdles?
Yeah, this is a big topic. So how I look at this is a few ways. One of them is just describing the differences between, efficient content and inefficient content. What I do see still to this day is quite a few companies that are working towards this, but it's still done fairly inefficient, and it's just creating a lot of it's creating a lot of friction to make it successful in the long term. So inefficient content is expensive to make, number one. And expensive is obviously subjective, but what I mean by that is if it is costing you an amount of money to produce on an ongoing basis that is having you say it has to work quickly or else we need to shut it down, then it's too expensive.
Yep.
So that's number one. It's inconsistent. So there's no repeatable format or cadence to it that you can do on a recurring, consistent, scheduled basis. So it's like, hey, we're going to, release one episode of the podcast this month, and then next month maybe we'll do two, and then the next month it's just more ad hoc than it is consistent, habitual. And why that's important is because the people you want to develop into your audience and people paying attention to your content, you want them to build the habit around when you're releasing and how frequently, let alone you need quantity to push through to even get awareness from people. It's created in silos. So a newsletter is written, somebody opens up their laptop and they just start writing the newsletter. Social posts are written just for social. Podcasts are recorded for podcast. There's no
alignment.
Ecosystem between those all working together to help feed each other. And not saying I'm not a huge fan of repurposing in the sense of everything has to 100% be repurposed for every platform, because there's big contextual differences between all the platforms. But you can have the pillar core material to work from that then helps power those platforms for you. they're quickly abandoned, would be another one. So in the sense that organic content works, but it's not predictable. So there's no way to know, no matter how good you are, okay, at month 3, like we're going to have X amount of followers, or we're going to see X amount of engagement, or we're going to see X amount of inbound from our organic strategy. It's just, it doesn't work like that. So if you don't give it enough time, because of maybe some of these other factors, like what you want to see is directional correctness with your strategy, and you should be able to see that early. But for the actual strategy to compound the way that you want, it takes time. And then the last piece, which is actually the most important thing to get right first. So there's a difference. The second way I look at this is effective versus efficient. So the first thing you want to do is make sure you have memorable and differentiated content, and then layer on efficiency to that process. So you won't be able, if you have an efficient content production process, but the content is not effective in actually like allowing you to be perceived in the market the way you want, it's differentiated, it's memorable, people are compelled to hit play, and then when they hit play, they are obsessed with it and they want to listen to every single episode in your back catalog. You know, both of these sides, effective and efficient, are difficult, but you have to have them both, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting when you're talking about it all. I can relate to to all the challenges, obviously, with us internally, and it's things that you work through. And something that we're obviously trying to create here with Pulse as well is that it's not here to just create, another podcast, or you don't just want to be doing that, right? Like, as in you need to have, memorable content, as you say, and have something that makes people want to come back and deliver, I suppose, that being cliche, but deliver value and have conversations, etc., that are worth listening to. And I think some of the points there you've raised are great. One of the challenges we've had, and I know that as smaller teams, just from networking and talking to people, etc., and friends, etc., in different spaces, that is like, as a smaller team. Because there's some teams, right, as in like small, you look at some companies and they got a small team, but they pump out amazing content. I'm not necessarily talking amazing, the highest production quality, etc. I'm just from a storytelling perspective, or just from authenticity, just everything feels great, right? When you interact with it, when you consume it. And they're a small team and they just manage to pump out what feels like just massive amounts of content, right? And then you get these other organizations or brands, and it's like, how are you not creating like 20 times more than what you're doing? And also, like, what you are doing is just, I'm not gelling with that kind of thing. So what are your comments on that? Like, how do we get a really fired up team that, may be small but agile and can deliver, top quality stuff?
I think you can do this with a really small team, to be honest with you. If it's just one person, like if it's the subject matter expert is also the person managing the post-production process and all of that does get challenging. And that's where you do have to 80-20 the quality versus like just getting the content out there. You can't be too picky in that case. But then there's the flip side where it's like the content by committee thing, where some of these larger companies where we've worked with in the past, they've literally got 10, 15 people involved in this process. And not necessarily one person owns it from a decision-making standpoint and is really championing it and moving it forward. That's a recipe for failure right there. So my opinion is you need a content person or a content manager, and you need an SME, a subject matter expert, a domain expert, the CEO, somebody who is of the culture of the people you're trying to sell to. So if you sell to developers, ideally this person has been a developer, is a CTO, a technical leader. If it's a marketer, they've got a marketing background. It's not ideal to do this in a way that you want to, if you're doing this to build thought leadership, create demand, create affinity, build trust, all of those things, ideally you have somebody who is of the culture of who you're trying to sell to. You can have a host run this playbook and be the guide, almost like a tour guide. Like let's say let's say you sell to HR leaders, but you have nobody on your team who has HR leadership credibility. You can and should still do this strategy. You just have to slightly tweak it and act more as the guide. And your job is to uncover the best information from that market and present it in a unique way that they haven't seen before, and helps them connect dots in their career. But really, this can be accomplished with a team of two, as small as two, and I would say ideally no bigger than like four. So you've got the SME, who's going to be the face of the content, and then you've got a content manager who's helping facilitate the post-production process, whether that be with, an agency like Hatch, or just using tools or doing it in-house. And then the creatives. And again, you can outsource that or you can have it in-house, but whether that's the, audio, video, design, what have you. And that to me is the best, most, efficient team makeup of this, because what you don't want is you want your SME to be able to come on for 2 to 3 hours per week and their work is done. You want them to deliver the insights, deliver the thinking. Their job is the hard part, honestly, is to do the original thinking or study original research and draw their own conclusions from it and share their perspective on it for your market. All of that stuff, again, is the memorable, differentiated content. But what you don't want them to do is have to manage their, job plus any parts of the post-production process, like selecting what moments do we then post, and how do we deliver this across each platform? Do we upload this to YouTube? What's the title of it on YouTube? Like all these decisions that have to get made from a post-production standpoint. So that's where I think it really is helpful to at least have one content person manage that, and almost act as the operations, like the content operations function.
Definitely. And I think there's some great insights there, and that's what we're kind of building internally here as well. And definitely looking at some external advice and stuff as well, but trying to build our own content program, and totally agree with you. As in the past, we probably have had too many barriers and too many decisions, and if you know what I mean, too many things up where it's like it just halts progress. But at the same time, you've got to have a good enough framework that you're not putting out, low quality stuff, low effort stuff, right? Because yes, you may be, as you said earlier, you might be putting something out, you might be highly efficient at it, but it's not effective. And so you've got the other problem, which is great. You might have it out there, but you're putting all of this time and effort into it. You're pumping things out, but it's not getting the results you want. I'd love to get your thoughts on, building sustainable content programs, and where you think is too much. Is there too much? And what I mean by this here is with an organization or a company, a brand, whoever it is, whatever it is, looking to, produce, is there too many podcasts? Is there, for example, if they've got, a short form series going on, they might have more of an internal looking podcast as well as an external podcast. They might have different themed podcasts. Is there any kind of balance that you would recommend, or is there anything that you would say is too much, too little? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't think we are anywhere near saturation of content for B2B categories. I don't think we're anywhere close to it, including for some of the most popular categories, marketing, sales, because you can just look at it like in the last 12 months, oftentimes you will find that you have a new grouping of shows or B2B creators or people you follow that you didn't follow the 12 months before. And that's not slowing down. The pool of people who post on LinkedIn weekly out of their, I believe, 700 million users is like 1% of them. So meaning like there's 700 million people on LinkedIn consuming content. Obviously, it's not maybe exactly 700 million, and all of that, not all of them are active or what have you, and not all of them are in your category. But the point is, 99% of people who are in your audience, total addressable market, are not creating content, and that pool is growing, and there's really not that many people. There's only 1% of people creating content for them. And so, yes, there are a lot of podcasts. I mean, I think there's about 4 or 5 million of them. Only 350,000 of them have released an episode in the last 30 days. And that's across all podcasts, not let alone just like B2B categories. And so, my take on this is there should be way more content brands, whether it be video series or podcasts or even newsletters, any form of audience building, owned content for each B2B category. And then the other way to look at this is, what's the alternative? Like, of course, there's the saying, like, you're going to like in 3 years, you will wish you have started 3 years ago. Yeah. And how I can highlight that is, if you go look at all the podcast charts, the top podcasts on all the charts. And by the way, I don't believe in using that as a marker for success at all, but it's interesting to highlight this for this purpose. All the podcast charts, like the marketing category, the business category, entrepreneurship category, usually a good number of shows in the top 20, top 50 on those charts are shows that no longer are seen, honestly, as like the dominant shows in those categories, but they were ones that were started 7 years ago and they've never stopped.
Yeah.
So just by function of being fairly early to their category and having a sustainable process and never stopping means they still, to this day, have the compounding effect of all of that working for them. And so that kind of just highlights, like, it's, of course, like, your strategy should be to create content that is better than any other content out there. And there's a whole bunch of stuff we could talk about for that. But one really easy way to win is just start before most other companies in your category start.
Yeah.
And don't stop. Like, and you can, of course correct and pivot along the way, but literally being early is a strategy. And it's very clear that this strategy works. Like, there's tons of case studies that creating podcasts, creating YouTube channels, creating newsletters, writing stuff and posting stuff on social works to build B2B companies. If it doesn't work, then it means you may not be doing something right with it, or you can adjust your strategy, but the strategy works. So the question is just like, when are you going to start? Or what's the alternative? Are you going to keep giving Google money? Are you going to, keep trying to do cold email? Like, what's the alternative?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. And I love seeing companies and brands come up with like really creative ideas. It doesn't have to be like way out there. It's not the point, but just sharing like just real stuff, right? That's valuable. And a lot of, I think personally, what brands and organizations probably take for granted, it's just definitely not the right way to say it, but probably overlook is probably a better way to say it. But it's like, oh, we're not interesting enough, or like, as in no one would want to listen to this, or no one wants to listen to me, or no one wants to listen to us, or whatever it is. And I know that for myself. But it's like, well, no, every organization has, an interesting perspective or interesting way they have do things, or, just how they're growing their journey, etc. as well. That the right people, you may not have millions of listeners, right? As in, you may not be mainstream. You don't need that many. It's the right people are going to listen to it. They're going to, it might take time, as you say, like, to build that up and to get authority and to continue to getting more and more followers. And some people will join the journey and other people will drop off along the way, but slowly that will build up. And I totally agree with you. There's a massive, what seems to be, lag behind in content, and it's basically like that. You would be familiar with this as well, but like B2C and B2B over time, like B2C is always in front of like B2B, and that's just historically how it's been with anything from kind of e-commerce websites and that kind of digital customer experience through to content, through to influencer marketing, et cetera, et cetera. And this is just one of them. And I totally Totally agree with you. I'd love to hear your thoughts on, from your experience of a case study, or you don't have to share any confidential information, but just an example of where you've seen in a shorter period of time, like maybe 6 to 12 months, where maybe someone or an organization that thought something like a strategy like this just wouldn't work, but stuck with it anyway, and turned things around and really had some great results. Love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I mean, obviously this is a pretty obvious one, but it's the one that I think um, really highlights this the best, because it's an extreme case in terms of the outlier success, but also the inputs that went into it. So I don't think you have to go this extreme, but I do think showing the extreme is a good case study. And that's obviously, somebody we talked about earlier and somebody you're familiar with, but it's Chris. I think
Yeah.
Chris Walker and what he did with his content strategy, his podcast, his LinkedIn over the last 3 years, and how he used that to grow Refine Labs and now Paceto, is one of the best case studies in the world for it. There's lots of companies out there that are doing this effectively as well, but again, I think this is a good extreme version of it, where the amount of content he put out, the consistency of it. He's posted every single day on LinkedIn for, I believe, the last 4 years straight.
Wow.
He's released, I believe, on average, four episodes of his podcast per week for the last 4 years. And he's refreshed and refined his thinking and how he talks about the problems, how he champions the problems, how he develops his strategic narrative, and evolves over time. And that has led to them being able to look in their self-reported attribution, win-loss analysis, things like that, and directly attribute more than $10 million per year over the last few years in revenue just from their podcasts and LinkedIn. And so again, highlighting you don't need that much volume for this to work for you, and you can take a day off posting from LinkedIn on the weekend if you want, to be with your family, but the sentiment is highlighting how well this can work. And one thing I'll mention too, related to that, is similar to what you were saying before, of giving people peace of mind that you don't have to. Everybody who creates content, no matter how good they seem or how smart they seem, has struggled with thinking that they don't have enough quality stuff to talk about. I can 100% assure every single person about that. And my opinion on one of the best ways to power through that is to become prolific in quantity first to get to your quality. Doing the content. So one of the best ways to develop points of view and actually develop more expertise is to try to teach the things that you believe in, that your market is in, that your space is in, that you think a lot about, but you don't necessarily write down or articulate. And so, learning by teaching, honestly, I think is actually the most supreme method for getting better at the craft of articulating your points of view, developing new points of view, and all of those things. So I think using quantity as the tool to get to quality, and literally just looking at this as the measures of success is if we're getting good anecdotal feedback, we're getting good directional feedback that we're going the right direction. But the measure of success is I'm hitting my cadence and I'm refining my thinking every single week.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I can only talk through personal experience, right? And it's definitely something I struggle with in regards to, with just in any situation when you're podcasting or sharing your thoughts, etc. It's, you always feel like, is it going to be valuable? How do I make it valuable? People want to listen, but we're on this journey. Well, I'm on this journey. Anyone doing it is just as much as anyone else, right? And we're learning just as much as anyone listening. Right? It's just we're all just sharing knowledge together, and it's definitely a journey. I can say that. I wanted to get your thoughts on content that brands are doing to increase the digital customer experience, and I'll explain my thoughts a little bit clearer there around how do you think brands can integrate this not only in, let's say, pre-sale, but also post-sale and like relationship and account management? Because definitely some of the brands I follow most, I suppose, feel most connected to, again, without being cliche, but where you feel like there's, more about the brand just in general, and it may be subconsciously, but you look back and realize that you've been consuming just content that isn't corporate content, that's been highly refined, that's been through 48 approvals, and it's taken 6 months to produce, etc. And to me, it's a lot of people talk about, which is obviously granted, but is relationship building and pre-sales and, getting trust with prospects in your audience, which is obviously massive and the main thing. But I think a lot of what's overlooked as well is that when you do have customers and they are, loving what you're doing as a brand, it just continues. So the way I like to describe it is it's like a regular check-in. It's like an account management meeting with them, right? As in, you're not doing it. You don't have to go one-to-one to everyone, but suddenly, like, who you're dealing with in an organization or something else. Like, I know this just from my own personal thing. People are like, oh, I was listening to you on this the other day. I saw this. And it's like, wow. Okay. So like I somewhat connected with you as a client, but I didn't. I don't know. I trust that makes sense, but I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, this is a really good point. It's a very under talked about part of this strategy of creating content. And there's a few ways we can look at this, but I think that marketing to your current customers is one of the with content is one of the best forms of marketing. Like, it's much easier to grow revenue by retaining customers than continuing to have to acquire new customers. But yet most of our focus, most companies, is on like acquiring new customers. And like once they're in, yes, of course we're like taking care of them and working on that. But like from a marketing perspective, content perspective, a lot of times like we don't delineate between the difference between them. Like we've got our podcast, we've got our YouTube. Current customers can watch that. Future customers can watch that. But we're not necessarily being intentional about the differences between them. And so it's a really great point. So there's a few ways that you can do this. One of the ways, the simplest way, is to like create a content series championing your customers. It's not testimonials. Like, it's not about you, it's about them. So taking your relationship, the goal with it is to have people who are similar to them want to consume that content, but at the same time, you are deepening your relationship like with that customer. And obviously, like certain companies, like if you've got 4,000 customers, it's a little hard to scale that. But still, you can pick and choose like who you want to do that with and use that really intentionally. And again, I think co-created content or content that you collaborate with other people on is one of the best ways to build relationships. Just because you have the interview or the recording doesn't mean good things are going to happen. You just use that as another wedge into the relationship and deepening it. That's the easiest one. The second way I would think about this is private content for your customers specifically, whether that's like a private podcast feed, which the technology exists to do that. They can listen to it in their podcast app, but nobody else publicly can consume it. So it feels special. Basically, you want them to feel like they are receiving premium content that is just for them as a benefit of being a customer at your company. And the technology exists to do that. It's actually pretty straightforward. You can use a tool like Supercast to do that. You could use private YouTube channels, things like that. And the good thing with that is you can actually have the content be even more valuable in the sense of like how you look at what is included in it, because maybe you can get more raw and honest than you could on a public feed, or maybe you could solve more. You're not trying to sell them anymore, or like try to present yourself in a way that like they want to buy from you. So you can now have an angle of that content that is
More
like
like
literally
training.
yeah, it's like meant to empower them more now that they're in. So that's one way you could do it as well.
Yeah, definitely. It's a really interesting idea, and I think it's brilliant. What's the number one bit of advice? So it might be hard to break down to one, but to giving it to someone or a brand or an organization or something that's like, okay, fine, we want to get into this podcasting thing, we want to get into this video series thing. From my perspective, I'd be saying, don't start it for the sake of trying to get leads, right? It's just that's my personal opinion on it. It's just the wrong idea. You're going to create the wrong content. It's going to come off wrong. It's just not going to be, it's just not, there's not a good start, right? As in, you've got to have, as we were discussing earlier, someone that can connect, speak like, relate to the audience that you're trying to target, and guests, etc., and everything that align with that as well. So that would be mine. I'd love to hear your thoughts on kind of what your one would be when someone's starting out, and what advice you'd give them.
I love that one from you. And I'll add my own here, but yeah, that one is fantastic. Because this is a strategy to use as a content creation vehicle that powers all of your channels. So you're not looking at the podcast success in isolation in your podcast analytics, although that is a marker that you're resonating, like your consumption rate, your downloads, all of that stuff. But it's like, is LinkedIn, or is, if it's powering a newsletter, is YouTube, is the podcast, like all those things together, this organic content creation strategy, is it leading to more people over time coming and saying, I want to work with you all because of the content you created? So that, I love that. It's not about like, does this podcast episode create a lead? Because that will actually create reinforce for you to create content that won't do that. Actually, like if you're trying to create a lead from an episode, you very likely will not do that. You'll do the opposite. But what I would say is another really important one is to think about attention versus intention. And so what I mean by this is when you're creating your strategy for your show or for your series, I think it's much better to think about it as a niche focus versus a broad focus, meaning you want a smaller number of people to absolutely love your content, not want to miss an episode, feel like it's designed just for them, than for a larger group to feel like, okay, this is kind of, in my world, like seems interesting, but not super compelling, because you want people to know who you are, perceive you as the expert, and ultimately trust you enough that they want to do business with you. So that is the intention part. Getting attention is actually much easier. You can create kind of surface level, like, for example, you could just create memes. Like you create a bunch of meme pages and like get a bunch of likes and follows and what have you, but you're not actually creating any intent for people to know who you are, what you do, or why they should choose you when they're in market to buy in your category. And so I think like, I don't think you have to, and niche doesn't mean small, by the way. Niche is just a classification of the focus of your content.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And one of the things regarding, you just touched off on it there, is about the stats, etc. And it's something I hear people talk about as well a bit. I know Chris talks about this quite a bit as well, but he's around, people like, oh, no, we got it from direct traffic, or, we got it from a Google ad or something, when in fact, someone's been listening to the podcast for three months. They just clicked on the branded Google ad and came through to the website, right? Like, and it's not just as black and white as just saying, attribution that easily, right? And I think one of your quotes is, it's the art and science of looking at, making sure that the attribution is not just looked at purely on I suppose, a black and white basis. I want to get your thoughts now moving into the future of content marketing. Obviously, there's so much stuff going on about AI. We're doing a lot. I spoke last week about AI. There's just stuff happening here, there, and everywhere. There's people that are saying it's overhyped. There's people that are saying it's fear mongering. There's others on the other side saying all jobs are going in 3 years. I see it somewhere in the middle. I don't think it's like that. My thoughts on it is that there's going to be a seismic shift in how we work, no matter who you are, what you do. But it's the people that embrace it, take it on, and learn how to be more productive with it that are going to be the winners of it. Essentially, some of what I've repeated a heap is how do we learn how to do 5-10 times more than what we used to do, but with the same amount of resource. And I'd love to get your thoughts on this, especially in content marketing. It's one of the bigger ones that's come up. Obviously, it's probably an easier to understand use case, especially with something like AI, where people don't understand the technology behind it. There's been quite a bit of stuff that started with, you would be quite familiar with, the products like Jasper and that came out earlier on, early days, and now we've got Sora and those kind of models coming out. HeyGen as well. We've got talking head videos. I've seen people already do AI video generated podcasts as well. And there's so many things to touch off on. And I want to first touch off on the authenticity side on AI and where you see that going specifically on how you see it being intertwined. It's probably not the right word, but into content strategies, and whether or not you ever see that being a thing, or if you do, what kind of time frame.
Yeah, I look at AI and content marketing similar to how I look at the effective versus the efficient, kind of guidelines for content strategy. So I look at this as a game of who knows their ICP the best, who understands them the best, who understands their problems, the things they need to learn, the things they want to learn but can't find great content for, who they look up to, like who understands them the best so that they can address that in their content. I do not believe that AI is going to be able to do that as effectively as a human expert in that space and in that category through their just years of experience, conversations, connecting dots. But what I do think is that AI and content marketing will be able to take that and then how that is created from there, like whatever original thinking or original research is created, and make the rest of the process more efficient. But I don't think that your advantage is going to come from using AI, because it simply cannot be that simple. And the reason for that is, like, by definition, you will be creating undifferentiated content. If anybody can go use the tool and create the AI podcast for your category, then by definition, that means anybody else in your category can do the exact same thing. And if you're all, funneling that from the same, LLM that's got the same repository of data in it, sure, you can like prompt it with different prompts. And like, it's kind of about how what questions you prompted to then create the thing. But still, like on paper, you can literally create a carbon copy of the exact same thing in the exact same amount of time. So I don't think that the differentiation is going to come from that. You can talk about, I think people want to connect with humans too, and have humans be like the face of these things so that like they feel more connected there. Like I believe B2B companies of the future, like a massive advantage for them are people, and the ones who are going to win are people who can name people who work there by name. Like I know this person, this person, this person. And the only way to get to that is they see them on these content platforms, on these social platforms. And AI may be able to help them with the production of their stuff, but the original thinking, the original insights, I don't see that being outsourced to AI as a competitive advantage.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. There's a few things I wouldn't say disagree, but I would clarify from my perspective and my thoughts on this is where the way I describe it to people is like, if you're lazy now, as in being lazy with AI, it's just going to help you do more lazy, low quality rubbish, right? So like, if you're prepared to put the effort in, you're prepared to do some of the thinking, right? You can then use it to help you 10x that, right? 20x that. For research, right? Things like Perplexity, it's impressive, right? It helps you do what may have been manually done and taken you half an hour in 5 minutes. So it's not that it does it all for you, it's how you use it. And I totally agree with that. People just think that, I can just generate me a whole podcast idea for X business and it's going to create this amazing podcast that gives you, no, that's not going to happen, right? But the effort it would have taken, the facts are the tools there now today to help you create an amazing podcast probably 5-10 times quicker than you could have 5-10 years ago, because you've got a tool that can help you be more productive, give you more ideas, help you ideate faster, help you give you feedback, you can give it feedback, etc. But it is not an excuse to be lazy, because that's just going to be picked up. And I totally agree with you on that front. The real creativity and the nous is the way I'd put it, probably comes from the human side of things. Then we deploy AI effectively where it's good. And then we can focus on things where it's not, which means that we can get way more done.
Yeah, and I think like you will be able to gamify this like in the short term and maybe even for a while. Like maybe you can right now, because there aren't too many people that have figured all this out, create an AI podcast for your category that like no human actually is really producing. It's just the AI thing. And like you get it to X amount of thousands of downloads and like it actually does drive results. Like I think there are some companies that will figure out these hacks, but I do not think that they're like a long-term play or long-term solution for how to use these things. Like, sure, you can go find some AI tool to write you 1,000 SEO optimized blog articles right now, probably, and maybe help you for like, a window of time rank for certain keywords. But like, are those gamifications really like the long-term foundation of your content strategy that you want? Like, are you planning to be in business in 5 years? Like, if so, you may not want to rely on gamifying, hacks that are like window of time arbitrage with AI tools versus like, to your point, like just doing the hard work, foundation work right now, but then using AI to facilitate that process.
Yeah, definitely. Like a thing I always bring up internally here as is kind of like an acid test, if that's the way you want to put it, is like, would we consume this ourselves? Mm-hmm. Would I listen to this? Would we listen to this? And especially as a team, and this is something I ask for feedback. It's not always easy to get, but ask for feedback within the team is like, are you listening to it? Do you want to listen to it? Right. And if they don't, then why? Right. And that's some of the best people that can give you feedback to, they're prepared to be candid to say, well, we need to improve this, or we need to do that, or, we need to do this. And that's where I think the acid test really, and this, again, not just applies to podcasting, anything. Okay, so we do a video series, and okay, are people going to watch it? We don't want to watch it. If we don't want to watch it, why is everyone else going to want to watch it? Or you do a blog article, you do anything, right? As in, I think it's a great way to test that. And I would like your thoughts on, we have discussed obviously a bit around authenticity as well, with obviously the human touch and everything. Totally agree with what you said there, but I'd like to just get your thoughts on, when you've got tools like HeyGen and Soar and etc., which are going to be able to create, for example, will be able to eventually create a very realistic version of my likeness, where I can generate, we potentially together could generate a podcast like this, that was all entirely AI generated. Again, my question comes back to authenticity, right? And what that looks like. But I'd love to get your thoughts on that specific point, and whether or not, even if it's not a full podcast, it might be a solo thing where, for example, it is used on 1 minute, 2 minute segments where, okay, I use AI to generate videos, 60-second clips that I didn't have the time to do, but it's still my thoughts, right? So yeah, just an interesting one I find, and I'd love to just get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm not there's some people who are, avidly against it just from like a concept, like conceptually point of view. And then there are some who are like, well, it's inevitable. We need to lean into this. Like, let's figure out how best to use it. And then there's people in the middle. Um, what I think is it is inevitable. These things are just going to continue to get better, and these things, even like what you just described, it will exist in some time period. That's going to
100%.
exist. What I think will happen though is, and we can use it as businesses, we can use it. What I think will happen though is that kind of what's happening with social media with like younger generation teens right now and stuff like that, where what I've been seeing just like reading and what's happened over the last 10 years is like, Facebook, Instagram, all those things came out, and, young teens started using them like crazy. They had no real like guidelines on them. Parents didn't really understand what it was doing to their brains, all of that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. And now if you ask like a lot of 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds, 21-year-olds, they will tell you they wish they didn't have them during that time. And so that the kids younger than them now, they're more aware of that problem themselves. Some of them are opting out of spending as much time in social media or social media at all. So I think the same thing will happen here. We'll go through a period of like incredible technological innovation. We will use a lot of these AI tools. We'll probably overuse them to the point where we open up LinkedIn and nothing we see on LinkedIn we think is real. And then over a period of time, we'll realize how messed up that is. And then the person who says, no more, I'm not using AI, I'm just doing whatever I record as me, that person will now be unique, and we'll kind of move back to the pendulum of a happy medium, I think. Like similar to what's happening, I think, with social media usage in general.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think the way I describe it is just the social media thing, which is the, especially Instagram, etc. It's got this name for it that, it's this perfect, it's all a facade. Basically, a lot of it is, right? And the AI somewhat strikes me in how I think about things is like somewhat strikes me, it strives for perfection, if that makes sense. And if you're producing perfectly good content 100% of the time, that's just not natural. That's not normal. No one in the world does that. Where 100% of the time they are, producing this perfect lighting, perfect sound, perfect content, all the mix. And if that's, which it will be, unless it's prompted otherwise, right? Because that's it's constantly striving for perfection. I don't know. It's again something I don't see a lot of people talking about, but something I find very interesting. It's not only that it's AI and it's something else, but it's like it could be so good that you don't. It's not like it's AI. You don't even realize, but it's this. You become numb because everything's just so perfect.
Great point. Great point. And it like one thing I think about as well is like, yes, you need to pick your niche and your category. What are the topics you address? What's your positioning of your content? What problems does it solve? How are listeners and viewers going to be different once they consume it? Like, what's the promise you're making to them? All of those things. But also, your niche is you, literally you. Like, some people will just gravitate to you when others are talking about similar topics, even though you've created a good content strategy that is differentiated. Like, your personality, how you describe things, how you talk, all of those things, those unique elements that make you you, is literally a differentiator as well. And so, yeah, like again, outsourcing that to, AI that's a replicated version of like certain characteristics of your personality, but not 100% of them, to your point, actually like defeats that purpose a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally agree. Well, I appreciate your time, Erik. It's been a great chat so far. We have a finale segment. It's a couple of questions that I ask every guest that I'd love to get your thoughts on. So I'll jump into that now, just to wrap things up. So the first one is, what's one thing you believe businesses are not paying enough attention to right now that will be critical in the next 5 years?
I touched on this before, and especially with the AI content, proliferation. But I think that any strategy you can do to get more future customers to know the names of people inside your company. I think that over the next 5 years, that is going to be one of the biggest unlocks for go-to-market strategies. And so if you just extrapolate that, it's like, how do we do that? It's through being on all the platforms with person-led profiles and content that are building relationships at scale on those platforms on behalf of the company.
Yeah, definitely. And I love to hear it, because we're 100% committed to it here. It's exactly what we're working on. We've got multiple things in the works, and I totally agree with you, right? I think especially in the B2B space. So the next one is, what legacy do you want to leave in your industry? How do you hope your work will influence or shape the future?
I don't think too much about legacy or like changing the industry or anything like that. What I focus on is my definition of doing good work with good people and building a good business that
Awesome.
helps our customers. Like that's honestly enough for me. I
Yeah.
want to wake up every day and enjoy the work I do. I want it to be hard. I want to challenge myself, and I want our customers to love us. I hold a really high standard
Yeah.
for the quality of our work, and that's something I take pride in more than more than an external goal of like influencing an industry. I
Yeah.
very much respect people who do that, but that's not my personal goal.
Yeah. No. Awesome. As in, I relate to what you said absolutely as well. So I think that's great. The final one is, if you could go back in time, what advice would you give to your younger self at the start of your career?
At the start of my career, I would say think bigger and think longer term. At the start of my career, I was coming from a place where I hated my job, and like I had all these goals, and my goals were very short term. Like my execution was done with like not short term execution, which I'm happy about. But
Yeah.
the definition of happiness is reality minus expectations. My expectations when I was younger of how quickly it would be for me to reach certain milestones, have my business get to a certain point, all those things, those are hard to contend with over time if you don't hit those. And so I
Yeah.
think it's good. You have to balance these goals. So like, I think it's important to have goals, but I also think it's important that like you have a long-term big picture. This is my entrepreneurial and business career that I love doing and want to do forever. I don't have to do this thing in the next 12 months or I'm a failure.
Yeah.
And that's what I would just keep doing what I'm doing, but remove the negative expectation, the negative, mindset if the expectation is not met.
Yeah. Brilliant. I think that's great advice. Great advice. And I really appreciate you coming on. It's been a wonderful chat. A lot of great experience and knowledge that you've shared with us, and I really, really, really do appreciate your time. So I thank you for that. If you found today's episode insightful, you can head over to our learning center at intuji.com. I'd also love to hear from anyone listening for any guest suggestions or any way we can improve the show as well, and any thoughts that you may have. So thanks once again, Erik. Really appreciate your time, and we'll no doubt catch up again. Thank you.
Thanks, Julian.